Former U.S. Marine and State Assembly member Nathan Fletcher wrote an op-ed piece in today's Washington Post. It calls for expanding the criteria for receiving a Purple Heart.
Fletcher believes servicemen and women suffering from mental health injuries should be eligible for the award as well. He's here now to talk about that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for having me.
So in today's Washington Post, you are asking the president to amend the Purple Heart criteria. Why is that?
Well, what we have in America that we all agree on is we all agree there's an epidemic of veteran suicide. You know, every day in America we lose at least 20 veterans take their own lives. And on Memorial Day we honor those who lost to combat. We have to include these because they survived combat but not the peace that followed because of the combat experience. And the traditional answer is we'll fix the VA, make the VA work better. And we should all make the VA work better, but that ignores the fact that 70% of the suicides never called the VA. So the VA could be perfect and 70% of them would have still happened. Well, why didn't they reach out for help? We know based on long studies and empirical data that the reason they aren't asking for help is the stigma associated with post-traumatic stress and the unseen wounds of war. And the reality is veterans have no qualms about getting patched up, about asking for help when we're physically wounded. We brag about our injuries, but if it's the brain, because of the stigma, not only will we not ask for help, we won't tell anyone. And so the stigma is created. So with our words, we say there's no difference between a mental health injury and a physical injury sustained in combat, but with our policy we create a clear distinction where one of them is given an award and a medal and the other is cast into the shadows. And so if we believe as a statement of values that a veteran whose brain was wounded in combat, if we believe that is real, and I know it is, and those of us who have friends, then we have no choice but to award the same medal, Purple Heart.
But an injury, a physical injury, is so much easier to categorize. PTSD is a different animal.
Well, it is different in that you can't see it.
Yeah.
But it's not different in the fact that you were injured at war. You know, the actual criteria for the Purple Heart says an injury sustained in contact with enemy forces that requires medical treatment. It specifically says you don't have to have a physical lesion. So you can get a Purple Heart for a concussion. You can get a Purple Heart for TBI. There's a number of things. You can get a Purple Heart for being nicked, no stitch, no scar, no lasting impact. But if you come back with devastating post-traumatic stress, and you can't function, then we say no. And I think it reflects the broader cultural stigma surrounding mental health.
Let's talk about the Purple Heart for a moment and what it means and why it's so important to veterans and their families.
Well, it really signifies that sacrifice. It signifies that, you know, literally you bled for your country, that you were wounded in service for your country. And it is a very a medal of great honor and a medal that those of us who served, when we see it, we recognize people when we say thank you for your willingness to sacrifice and your willingness to serve. There is no severity test for the Purple Heart. You could lose all 4 limbs and get a Purple Heart, or as I mentioned earlier, we've had people that have had 2 or 3 of them with no stitch, no scar, no lasting impact. And I think the awarding the Purple Heart is symbolic, but the symbolism is what is so powerful, and the symbolism is what will help destroy the stigma. And if we can help destroy the stigma, then these vets will ask for help. And we know that veterans who request that help with what they're going through, we know their suicide rate plummets. And we just, I think when we have this epidemic, you know, today, I can understand my friends who I died at war with. I get it, you know, and I understand we were there for each other. We were there to serve. What I can't understand is that veteran who made it through war, who came home and had this joyous reunion, and they hugged their kids and they kissed their wife, and then they couldn't survive the peace that followed. And I don't want one more mom or dad or husband to get that call that says, hey, your loved one took their own life because they couldn't cope with the peace that followed war. And I think we got to do everything possible.
Boy, something to think about on this Memorial Day. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your service.